This is the story of Logan Pierce and his wife Amanda Pierce. The coffee mug she'd bought him 3 Christmases ago, white, slightly chipped on the handle, with the words Best Co-Pilot printed in faded blue, sat on the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning exactly where she hadn't moved it in 6 days. Logan noticed things like that. He'd always noticed things like that. He'd told himself it was because he was observant, that it was a quality. Amanda had once called it exhausting. Their marriage had the shape of a good one. 7 years, a house with a yard they kept meaning to do something with, inside jokes that still occasionally landed. But in the last year, the space between them had grown in the way water damage grows. Invisible at first, then suddenly you're looking at a wall that can't hold anything anymore. Logan worked long hours and came home proud of it. Amanda had built something of her own at Hargrove Consulting, and she wore that pride differently, quieter, closer to the chest. What neither of them had said aloud, even to themselves, was that they had stopped being each other's first call. Not dramatically, just gradually. The tension beneath their politeness had a name neither was ready to use. Logan had left his laptop charger at home that Tuesday, which was the only reason he came back. He pulled into the driveway at 11:40 a.m., noticed Amanda's car still there, unusual. She was normally at the office by 9, and let himself in through the side door out of habit. The kitchen was quiet. He could hear her voice from the living room, low and careful, the way she spoke when she was managing something. He wasn't trying to listen. He was looking for his charger. I don't know how far along, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 7. He stopped. Greg, I need you to understand what I'm telling you. The name landed differently than it should have. Gregory Shaw, her direct superior at Hargrove. Logan had met him twice, once at a company dinner, once at an awards function. He'd seemed fine, professionally confident, the kind of man who always knew which fork to use. I haven't told Logan yet. I needed to tell you first. Logan stood in the hallway with his hands still on the wall. He would think later about all the things he could have done in that moment. Walked in, made noise, announced himself. But something in her voice, not guilt exactly, but weight, the particular weight of a person carrying a secret that has grown too heavy, made him stay still. The call ended. He heard her exhale. He heard her sit down on the couch they'd bought together in a furniture warehouse outside the city. The one she'd said was practical, not beautiful. And he'd said, so, kind of like me, and she'd laughed the real laugh, not the polite one. He walked back out the side door without his charger. He sat in his car for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock. Then he drove to work and spent the afternoon in a glass-walled conference room discussing quarterly logistics. And he was present for every minute of it in the way that people are present, when the mind has evacuated to somewhere quieter and left only the functional machinery behind. That evening, Amanda made pasta. She asked about his day. He said it was fine. She said hers was busy. He said that was good. She poured them both a glass of wine, and he noticed, without saying anything, that she only took 2 small sips from hers before setting it aside. After dinner, she fell asleep on the couch, one hand resting on her stomach in a way that looked unconscious. And Logan sat across the room in the armchair and looked at her and tried to locate the feeling he was supposed to be having. What he found instead was something much quieter and much worse, the realization that he wasn't entirely surprised. That was the thing he would carry for a long time afterward. Not the betrayal itself, but the fraction of a second in which his mind had said, oh, rather than no, as if some part of him had been waiting for the wall to show what was behind it. He turned off the lamp and went to bed. Amanda didn't wake up. The mug sat on the counter in the dark kitchen, chipped handle facing out, catching a thin line of street light from the window above the sink. He gave her a week. It wasn't a conscious decision. He told himself he was processing, gathering, being rational. But the truth was simpler and less flattering. He wanted to see how long it would take her to tell him. He wanted to watch the shape of her silence and understand what it was made of. She was better at pretending than he'd given her credit for. Or maybe he had given her too much credit for transparency all along. And what he'd read as openness had only ever been the absence of a reason to hide. She touched his arm more, small gestures, her hand on his shoulder when she passed behind him, a brief press of her knee against his at dinner. He'd have welcomed it 3 months ago. Now it felt like stage direction. On Thursday, she asked if he was all right. You seem somewhere else, she said. They were in the kitchen again, always the kitchen it seemed, that room that asked them to perform normalcy. Work stuff, he said. The Henderson account's been a headache. She nodded and said, you should talk to someone about your stress, like professionally. Then she paused and added, almost to herself, or maybe just, I don't know, like this story or subscribe or something. Logan looked up. What? Nothing. She shook her head slightly, something briefly dislocated in her expression. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. He watched her for a moment longer than felt natural. She turned back to the cutting board. I'm fine, he said. What was happening, beneath all of it, was a conversation neither of them could initiate. Not because they lacked the words, but because starting it meant they couldn't go back to pretending they hadn't needed to have it. Logan had always valued control, not in the way of controlling others, but the internal kind, the holding himself together neatly kind. He'd learned it from a father who treated emotional expression as a structural weakness. Amanda had once said he kept his feelings on a very high shelf where he could see them but never quite reach. She hadn't been wrong. Now he understood the shelf had been, in some ways, an invitation to be left alone with them. He started paying attention to her phone, not in a surveillance way at first, just noticing when she turned it face down. Twice, 3 times. Once she laughed at a message and then caught herself and put the phone in her pocket and said, my sister is ridiculous, and he said, what did she say? And Amanda said, oh, it's dumb, and changed the subject without ever answering. Her sister lived in Portland. He thought about calling her, he didn't. On Sunday afternoon, she told him she was going for a drive, needed to clear her head. She was gone for 2.5 hours. When she came back, she looked resolute, the way someone looks when they've made a decision but haven't told you what it is yet. That night, lying in the dark, she said, Logan, I need to tell you something. He waited. I'm pregnant. He let the silence sit long enough to feel honest. Then, how long have you known? A couple weeks. Her voice was careful. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Are you sure now? Yes. Okay, he said. She waited for more. When it didn't come, she turned toward him in the dark. Okay? I'm processing, he said. Which was true, technically. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Her fingers were cold, and she gripped him the way people grip things when they're afraid of what happens if they let go. He stared at the ceiling and felt the precise weight of everything he wasn't yet saying. He told her on a Wednesday. Not because Wednesday had any significance, but because that was the morning he found the second phone. It was stupid, really. She'd left her bag on the hall bench when she came in from the grocery store, and something had fallen out. He'd gone to tuck it back in and found the second phone sitting at the bottom like a small, dense stone. An older model, prepaid by the look of it, no passcode. He didn't read the messages in full, he read enough. When she came back from putting away the groceries, he was sitting at the kitchen table with both phones in front of him, his own and hers. The spare was dark now. She saw it immediately. He watched her face do the calculation. She sat down, not across from him, beside him, 1 seat over, which struck him later as a strange choice. For a long time, neither of them said anything. A car passed outside. The refrigerator made its cycling hum. How long? He said finally. She didn't pretend not to understand. About 8 months. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone absorbing data and the baby. It wasn't a question exactly. It lived in the space between a question and a statement, and she filled it the way she'd been filling spaces between his words for years, carefully, tactically. I don't know, she said. I genuinely don't know. He looked at her. Amanda, I know how that sounds. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual managerial precision. I know. I'm not trying to. I'm not playing a game here. I honestly don't know. You told him first. She closed her eyes. I panicked. It doesn't mean. You called him before you called your mother, before you called me. In the first moment of that, your first instinct was Gregory. She didn't answer. The truth of it sat between them like furniture neither could move. Why? He said. And he meant it genuinely. Not as an accusation, but as a real question, the one he'd been turning over for 2 weeks. Not the affair itself, but why didn't you tell me something was wrong, before it became this? Was there a moment where you could have said, yes, she said. There were a lot of moments. So why didn't you? She looked at him then, and he saw something in her face he recognized from years ago, and had forgotten was still in there. The unguarded version, the one that existed before she learned it was safer not to need things too loudly. Because you would have fixed it, she said. You always fix things, and I didn't want to be fixed. I wanted to be. She stopped. What? Scene. I wanted to feel like someone was paying attention because they wanted to, not because I'd presented a problem. The silence after that had a different quality than the ones before it. I was paying attention, he said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. He'd been present the way a well-maintained building is present, structurally sound, functional, uninhabited. I know you loved me, she said. I never doubted that part, just not the right way, not in the way I needed. And I didn't tell you that. That part is mine. He looked at the 2 phones on the table. I need you to be somewhere else tonight, a hotel or your mother's. I need to think. She didn't argue. She got up, touched the back of his chair as she passed. Not his shoulder, the chair. And he understood, watching her, that she wasn't asking for anything, that she was already somewhere beyond asking. He sat at the table alone until the light changed. Then he made himself dinner and ate it standing over the sink, looking out at the yard he'd kept meaning to do something with. 3 weeks later, she was back, not in the way he'd asked for. She came back because he'd let her come back, because she had cried on the phone from her mother's house and said she wanted to try, and because he had felt something give way in him. Not forgiveness exactly, but the familiar pull toward order, toward not letting something fall apart, toward being the one who held it together. He agreed to stay. He agreed to wait for the DNA results. He told himself this was maturity. The results came on a Tuesday afternoon by email to the clinic, and Logan drove there alone while Amanda was at a prenatal appointment. He sat in the small consultation room with the result in a sealed envelope and thought about all the people who had sat in this same chair with sealed envelopes and known, already, on some level, what was inside. The envelope said what he'd suspected since November. He drove home. Amanda was already there, sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her, eating crackers from a box and watching something on her laptop. She looked up and said, "How was traffic?" And he noticed, in the fraction of a second before he answered, that she still had her bag near the door rather than on the hook. A small preserved readiness, an exit route she hadn't quite let go of. "We got the results," he said. She went very still. "They came in today." He set the envelope on the coffee table between them. "I already opened it." She didn't touch it. She looked at him instead. "I know what it says," she said quietly. "Do you?" "I think I've known for a while. She pressed her lips together. "I wanted it to be yours, that's the truth. I wanted it so much that I started to believe I could make it true by wanting it." He sat down across from her, not beside her. "And the meetings, Gregory." Her expression shifted. Something shuddered behind her eyes. "I ended it," she said. "I told you I ended it. I know what you told me." She looked at the envelope. He watched her face do the arithmetic. How much he knew, how much she'd been caught, how much of the last 3 weeks had been real, and how much had been maintenance. "He wanted to know," she said finally. "About the pregnancy, he had a right." "He has a right," Logan said. "Yes." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "Amanda, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry. I'm not shouting. I'm sitting here in our living room, and I'm telling you that I can't do this. Not because you failed some fidelity test, but because the person I thought you were, the version of you I was staying for, she was making choices the whole time that the version sitting in front of me was hiding. I made mistakes," she said. "That's not the same as. You kept a second phone, you had an ongoing affair, you got pregnant, and when you found out, you called him first, and then when you came back here, you were still seeing him, and you let me believe we were working on something." He paused. "What were we working on?" She didn't answer. "I'm filing next week," he said. She didn't cry. He'd expected crying. What happened instead was stranger. She seemed to contract slightly, like something settling under its own weight. She picked up the cracker box and set it on the table. She looked at the envelope. "I didn't plan any of this," she said. "I believe that," he said. "I think that's almost the saddest part." The last time they saw each other was in late March, 4 months after the papers were filed, 2 weeks after they were finalized. She'd asked if he would come to the house to pick up the remaining boxes she'd packed for him. She was renting a smaller place now, closer to her mother. He'd heard through a mutual friend that Gregory Shaw had been transferred to the firm's Denver office in January and had not, in any meaningful way, stepped forward. Logan arrived on a Saturday morning when the light was still pale. She opened the door before he knocked. She'd seen his car, he supposed. She looked tired. Not dramatically, not in a way that made a statement. Just tired in the way of someone carrying a consistent weight through consecutive months. Her stomach was visible now, round and low. and she stood with her hand resting against the door frame with the particular physical ease of late pregnancy. "The boxes are in the hall," she said. "Thanks." He went in. 3 medium boxes taped and labeled in her handwriting, his road maps, some books, a framed photo of his parents' house that had hung in the second bedroom, the chipped mug. He picked up the mug and looked at it. She was watching from the doorway. "I almost threw that out," she said, "but it seemed." She stopped. "It's fine." He set it in the top of one of the boxes. "You could have kept it." "No," she said, "I couldn't." He carried the first box out to his car, then the second. When he came back for the third, she was still in the doorway, and she said, "Logan." He stopped. "I need you to know that I did love you, not as a defense, just as a fact." He stood with the last box in his arms and thought about all the things a person could say to that, all the variations. He thought about the morning with the coffee and the charger, about lying in the dark while she told him she was pregnant, about the sealed envelope on the coffee table, about the chair she'd touched instead of his shoulder. "I know," he said. "Okay," she said. He carried the last box to the car. He didn't look back at the door, not because he was being cold, but because he understood, with a clarity that had taken months to arrive, that looking back was a thing he'd spent too much of his life doing. Looking back at the moment, before the problem, to figure out where it started. Looking back at the person he'd been when they were happy to understand what he'd missed. The yard at the old house had never been done anything with. He'd always thought that was a small failure. He understood now it was just a yard. He drove. The morning was cool and very still. Somewhere behind him, in a rented house, near her mother's neighborhood, Amanda stood in a doorway with her hand resting on her stomach, and the door was still open, and no one was coming through it. He turned onto the highway and let the city drop behind him. That was how it ended, not with doors slamming or with anyone learning anything in time to matter. Just 2 people standing on opposite sides of a distance they had both, in different ways and for different reasons, chosen not to close. Just the quiet, specific weight of a life that had been real, and had passed, and would not be returning.